Despite being very old, clunky, and in many ways outdated, I still love Mafia: The City of Lost Heaven. Its mission-based linear story approach inside an open-world game is still unique and benefits the wonderful and memorable story. The soundtrack is fantastic, though recent re-releases had to cut some of the great licensed music. And while the visuals are outdated, the cinematography of some scenes is still top-notch. A remake that would keep all of that and fix or improve lots of bad and outdated elements would have been fantastic, and clearly I wasn't the only one thinking this, as Mafia Definitive Edition aims to do exactly that. Since it's made by the same team who has delivered the disappointed Mafia 3 before, I've had my reservations, but thankfully, while this isn't as definitive of a remake as the title suggests, the game has delivered. I was most happy to see that the structure of the game was kept almost completely unchanged. It's still a chapter or mission-based game with no open-world filler in between, unless you launch a completely separate free ride mode, which has more sandboxy and arcadey missions. And it works fantastically. In fact, even some of the rare optional stuff from the original game has been moved to that separate mode, which I wasn't too keen on at first until I realized that most moments where the optional content were improved with either more story-driven elements to enhance the story, or made shorter to improve the overall pace of the story. And the story is overall still really well done. It has some tone changes and chapter tweaks, not all of which are for the better, but it's engaging, well told, and is mostly improved with the updated script, mission tweaks, and audio and visual improvements. The music is also still solid, while the city, as a character of its own, now feels even more alive. Even the simulation aspects of the original can be mostly kept intact if you select the appropriate difficulty setting, but if you weren't too fond of those, then driving, shooting, and exploring is in general more accessible, so if you only care about the story, you can do that. You can even now get an option to skip some of the rides, similarly to how LA Noire handled it, in case you care only about the important story bits and nothing else. Not all of the changes feel right, however. Some of the story bits were handled with less words in the original game, and in the remake, they feel over-explained to the point of deflating their impact. Some spots try really hard to say just how bad the life of crime is, whereas the original only implied that while keeping its more romanticized facade. And due to that, some scenes or character motivations feel less interesting, while the contrast with the sequel game, that was fantastic originally, now feels less stark and interesting as a result. The game also runs on the same engine as Mafia 3 seemingly, so most of the issues of that game remain. It constantly switches between looking fantastically in cutscenes to somewhat bland in exploration, there are noticeable hitches every time it needs to stream more data, even while the overall frame rate remains high and stable, and bugs can pop up here and there. I've not encountered anything game-breaking, and it's still not as bad as Mafia 3 still can be, but it's something to be prepared for. If you've never played the original Mafia, playing it now might not be a very enjoyable experience, even though some aspects of that game and its story feel considerably better than what we got in Definitive Edition. But luckily, the downsides of this version are easy to overlook, and if this is your first experience with the game or the series and you like story-driven titles, you will enjoy this game. I most certainly did.
For your trouble, Father.
I don't want your blood money.
You took theirs. Not a lot of difference from where I'm standing.